Imagine being on the run for decades. That's essentially the story of Violetta and Ivan Petrosyan, who are going to join us today on this edition of the Towards Understanding podcast. Now, they, because of their Armenian heritage, were not welcomed anywhere, even back in Armenia. This is right in the midst of the ending of the Cold War, and then what it meant for them to actually have hope and a purpose. They eventually did find that in a relationship with Jesus, and their story has been told in the movie Between Borders. We're going to be chatting to the real-life Violetta and Ivan on the way next, right here on the Towards Understanding podcast. But before we get there, could I just encourage you to rate, review, share, like this podcast, share it with friends, all of those sorts of things. The reason is we just have a heart to share these stories with others, hopefully to help each person understand more of their purpose in life. It's always free, but we just want to share it out, and that helps all the algorithms get it to more and more people. So thank you so much for doing that. All right, let's have a chat with Violetta and Ivan. Violetta and Ivan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for giving us a chance to share our faith.
It is so wonderful. Your life was made into a remarkable film called Between Borders and released just in the last couple of years. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but just what was it like to have your story up on a major film and in the cinemas and thinking that's our life story?
It still doesn't feel real, even though it was in January 2025 when the movie was released. And still every morning I wake up and I guess the posters remind me, and if you can see, that's the room. Our room was turned into Between Borders, and this poster is a reminder that it's actually real. And that means that somehow, God touched the heart of Lani Norris, who was our missionary in Volgograd, Russia, who we served side by side. And he decided, because he knew enough, and he decided that our life story is worth of sharing with the whole world. So they know, when you really believe and you depend on God only, and you know that He will provide and the miracles will happen. So I would consider this movie to be a miracle, another miracle that God performed in our life. And you know how much more easier it is now to share our faith, because when people sometimes stop and ask, by the way, where are you from? Listening to an accent. And instead of explaining as I used to do before, I would say, well, how about you just watch the movie? And it's called Between Borders, and I immediately go to Instagram account and show it to them. And so that made it very easy to share. And of course, we're honored and very grateful to what God has performed and all the people that were a part of it in an amazing, amazing way that it all happened. Still very, very grateful and privileged.
Let's tell a little bit of that story. It goes back to when the Soviet Union was actually starting to collapse. Could you tell us a bit of the story, what occurred, and then we'll start following some of your remarkable journey, which is certainly not remarkable in the sense of great fun, but in God's goodness to you. Could you take us back to the time when you started realizing, actually, this is getting a bit dangerous for you and the family?
Well, when just being raised in the Soviet Union, when we were used to hear all the time the Soviet Union is the best country in the world, that there is an enemy that's called the United States of America, and that they're always willing to attack the Soviet Union and take everything that we have, and always telling that it's pretty much all the evil that's coming from overseas, and that's how we were raised in our country. But when you are born in a certain area of the world, in a certain city, and you consider it to be your home, right? Because that's what you believe your roots are there, because your family lived there, because you were raised there. And that's how we also considered ourselves, just to be citizens of one of the best country in the world, which was called the Soviet Union, even though we lived in Azerbaijan, right on the Caspian Sea in Baku. And even before the Soviet Union collapsed, when the ethnic cleansing started and when the unrest happened in Azerbaijan, it was such a shock that we couldn't believe, because we always considered Azerbaijan be the most diverse country, and the country, the republic, that even though we use the Russian language as the main language of all the documentation, it was not even about that. It was about how many different nationalities lived in Baku. And I don't know if you've heard that Baku, those people who came from Baku, they still consider it to be a nationality, because if you meet people from Baku all over the world, they will not say Azerbaijan, they would say we're from Baku, which means we belong to Baku, and that's our nationality. And yes, all the years that we had our life there was, being raised as a child, and we met each other, then we got married, and we started raising our children. There was always a shadow of humiliation, because that's unfortunately how it happened. Being Armenians in the country of Azerbaijan, had always had slight, I would say, prosecution, which would become more evident with every year of aging or growing. In the beginning, being a child, you really didn't understand that you belonged to a different nationality, but the longer you lived the life, the more you connected with people in your workplace and other clubs, organizations. You would hear from now and then that we do not really belong to the country of Azerbaijan, but you would how to say, swallow that all, because we still enjoyed our life. We enjoyed everything that we did over there. And never ever that would cross our mind that one day we will just have to be forced to leave the city that we loved so much, and the family. We had a very large family, extended family, with all their siblings, aunts and uncles, and always had amazing gatherings. We were so close, such a close-knit family community, that it was heartbreaking just all of a sudden to cut all those threads that we're having, and just scatter and run for your life. I would say that some people probably were wiser. They left earlier when the cleansing started, but we loved that so much, and we had good jobs. Evan was working for that NASA program that he was making a biological equipment that actually flew to space. And I was working as a teacher, and then as the vice president of the school, in extracurricular activities. And the kids, 4 and 8 years old, they were pretty happy as well. And so we just tried to ignore the idea, or dismiss the idea that we have to leave. But unfortunately, one night when my mother was watching our children at home and we were still at workplace, the mobs came with just one intention, just to kill the family and take over the apartment. That was the night when we couldn't wait any longer, and we said, this is now, we have to pack and leave. We didn't have much time. We didn't have time to think. We didn't even connect with other relatives. We didn't know. We knew that they were all already leaving. So pretty much as it is depicted in the movie, we just grabbed backpacks, because Ivan was a mountain climber. We decided that was the easiest way. Backpacks, some little items, because that was in winter. That was January 1989. And we locked the apartment. We didn't even get any documents, his education, because I was so panicking. I didn't even know where to look. You know how you're running for life, you don't know where to find the items that you need. We locked the apartment, hoping that there would be a day when we returned. So that was the last time that we saw our apartment. And only because Ivan had friends in mountain climbing club, those friends told him about a very remote area in the mountains in Stavropol region, Mednogorsk, that actually had a radio factory that could very easily hire Ivan, because he was an engineer. And they told us about the place that we could probably escape, and they would follow us. So that's what we did. We didn't know where we were going. We just got a very late train at night, so to avoid groups of those mobs that were looking for us. We got on a train, then we changed the bus, then another bus, and then when we came finally to a very small village, there were some people that gave us a shelter the first night. But then the road of constant bumps and still facing, again, not being accepted in the Russian area, but those people who lived in that region, even though there were a lot of good people that were helping us, but it was still the shadow of being now blacks in the country of Russia. But again, it was an irony because the area where we settled in was pretty much, it's called the Karachaevo-Cherkessk, but there were a lot of people of dark hair, dark eyes. So evidently the tension was already in place. So it just added to, our hardships. It's very difficult to go into every, and I don't think we have time for that, to go into all the hurdles and details, but we've settled in that area. That was our first escape place where we stayed for 1.5 years before we decided to continue our journey.
Yeah. Ivan, during that time, are you, as somebody who is saying, well, I want to protect my family, I want to bless my family, I want to keep them safe, are you living from fear out of that, or sort of just focus and saying, well, I just have to do everything I can to try and get my family safe? What was the feeling for you?
Страх или фокус спасти семью?
Спасти семью, конечно.
It was just a focus to save my family. Not, of course, you run out of fear,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You fear because it almost happened. We were almost killed, and that's the fear that drives you, and then you have to focus of how to get to a safer place.
Yeah. So you said here you were for 1.5 years in that first time.
Mm-hmm.
We said at the start, we're speaking to you from the United States. We know that's where you're eventually going to get to, but it didn't happen immediately. There was other bumps along the way. After that sort of 1.5 years, you had to start finding different places again. What were the reasons for that you needed to find another spot?
Well, the reasons were multiple, because even though that was a very quiet and peaceful place in Stavropol region, but because the village was up in the mountains and a very small population, and people didn't really have any goals, I would say. Just watching how they work hard, and then they get home to their families and they drink severely, and just looking at the situation where to raise our daughters, we couldn't find the place to continue living. And also, again, from now and then, people will still bring our nationality question about that. You're not from here. We were watching you, even though you're okay. You seem to be good people, but you're still not actually belonging. So we had to make a decision. We couldn't continue longer because our girls were growing, and what they saw was not the way we wanted to raise our children, even though we were not Christians at that time. So that's why Ivan made a decision to go to Ukraine, to Kiev, where his your cousin had a small business on fixing, that was something related to hydraulic equipment. And because Ivan was so knowledgeable about so many things, so he moved first, and he showed what he could do, and he was hired by his cousin, and then he returned, picked us up, and we moved to Ukraine, to Kiev, where we lived for another year in Ukraine, trying again to settle in. I couldn't work because I didn't have proper documents. Ivan was the only one who luckily got that stamp as if he was checked out of Azerbaijan. The stamps in the passport. I did not have that because I didn't have time to do that. So that's why he was hired, and I didn't have any proper documents to find a job. So I was we were renting in a room in a house that it was not even easy to find. But I would say Ukraine was the safest place out of all the other ones that we've been living, of course, before we came to the United States. We couldn't stay there long enough as well, just 1 year, because again, I couldn't work and we needed to do something. And then there was a Ukrainian language that the kids were supposed to learn, and unfortunately, to add to their already traumatized mind, the first sentence that our daughter heard in a school in Kiev was the question, "Do you speak the Ukrainian language?" She said, "No." "Well, then our family will come to your house today and kill you because you don't speak." So she came back home all sobbing and weeping and scared, and I still don't understand why and how it popped the message itself, but it already laid the foundation for an additional fear. But those questions never popped again. But that was just a very sad and difficult start of her school life in Ukraine. But again, Ukraine was still a better place for us. But again, we couldn't stay because I was still unemployed and we needed an additional income. So we decided to try Armenia because we're Armenians. We thought Armenia is the country that will definitely welcome us. We tried. It took us about a couple months. It was not possible because Armenians from Armenia wouldn't accept Armenians from Azerbaijan because they called us upside down Armenians, Turkish, because we couldn't speak the language as fluently as they did. And hearing from a Russian speech coming from us in any public transportation would impossible even to have people around. They would literally move from one side of the bus or trolley bus to another one only because they hated the fact that we were there, present. Again, couldn't find any jobs, couldn't find any homes. And so my parents at that time moved to Russia, to Volgograd, and they had a very little, not called house, like a shed. And they kept telling us, so if you can't settle in anywhere, just come to Russia. And so that was, again, we moved from Armenia. After Ukraine and Armenia, we decided to go back to Russia now, to Volgograd. And that's the city where we lived for 17 years and raised our daughters and tried to get all possible jobs. That's where I was hired as a teacher. And if you remember the movie, that episode at school when I had was that very humiliating encounter, painful, with the school director. There were a lot of good things, of course, that happened in Russia. Speaking of how the Americans came and how God saved us over there, how many years we served the Lord together. But at the same time, that feeling of uncertainty, of scare, of humiliation, of being protected, it was just in us. And unfortunately, it grew every day. It was more and more difficult, and probably more and more difficult for Ivan than for me, because he couldn't find any job as an engineer. And with the help of American missionaries, he got this 15-passenger van, and he was like a route driver, and his encounter with all the passengers and all the police that constantly stopped and humiliated him in many ways and harassed. That was his life over there. But usually people in Russia didn't understand when we made that decision to come and try to apply for asylum, because they said, but nobody was mean to you. But how would I explain? I would never tell them every phrase that we heard, and every encounter that he had with police. I would just not, I wouldn't speak about it, because that wouldn't add any more positive emotions to our life. So that's kind of a route from Azerbaijan to Mednogorsk, Stavropol, Russia, then Ukraine, then Armenia, from Armenia back to Volgograd with our children. It took years before we finally, with the help of those missionaries, built a house that we lived in for a few years. That's pretty much
That's
the
remarkable.
nothing.
Thank you so much. We're going to come back in a couple of minutes' time because we want to hear a bit more of that journey, and also a bit more of what it means to step into a faith in Jesus and the change that's happened, and also the work that you are both now doing in helping others where you are at the moment. So that's all up ahead in just a couple of minutes' time. Their lives are in the film Between Borders. I'm having a chat with Violetta and Ivan Petrosyan, and they are my guests here on Towards Understanding.
Share your brand, your event, your message across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand by sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton Bielan. More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week, and with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au.
You said, and you talked about the fact that for 17 years you eventually did settle into Russia. During that time, I would imagine that the girls were going through quite a bit of trauma from what they've been through as well. Was that something that started displaying then? When did you realise actually what they've gone through is really impacting their lives?
I would say that when the Lord found us and we got saved, the focus on believing in God and following His ways, and we immediately started serving the Lord in the church, the First Church of the Nazarene in Volgograd, Russia, and everybody was involved. And the girls were and Ivan, they were in a worship team, and then he was a treasurer. I was a youth pastor, and when you have your full heart and passion in serving the Lord, after especially when you didn't know the Lord and you were actually protecting children from God, saying that God is evil, when your life flipped and changed dramatically, you probably would put everything back and not even thinking of how difficult it is to live your life when people around you always would point fingers at you because of your, hair color. Now we're gray, but we had dark hair and dark eyes, and the girls suffered and the girls cried a lot. But every time we would just go back home and pray and say, forgive those people who don't understand what they're saying and that they're offending us. But I know that deep down in their hearts, the girls were always willing to leave Russia, to go somewhere where they will not be constantly looking over the shoulder and thinking about what nationality they belong to. And they wanted to be accepted of who you are, for the gifts that God has given to them. And I guess that's because we prayed so much that God gives an opportunity to our girls to live together. That's another part of the story that just didn't find its place in the movie because that's too much. But we kept praying and serving and trying to ignore, all the comments, sometimes even at the church, not understanding. Sometimes you just drop a phrase and you say, Hachik was the nickname, like the offensive name for Armenians. Even your brothers and sisters of Christ, sometimes they would just drop the word without really not intending to hurt you, but because you're already so fragile, and every comment and every emotion would make it, deeper down, bringing more pain. And your brain immediately works, why you? Why is it's coming from your mouth? You are believers in Christ. Why don't you even think before you say? But it's a constant fight. 17 years of fighting and fighting, and then there is some breaking point when you just say, I can't do it anymore. But because we really wanted our girls first to forget everything that they've heard and they've been through, we wanted to see if God gives them an opportunity to be in a different world. And God provided a miracle after a miracle. So Olga, the youngest, again, was God's grace and the Norris's family. She got an opportunity to study at Bethel College, Indiana, to get her degree in major with singing and serving the Lord. And then Julia had an opportunity also to first study in Russia, but then they both met their future husbands, both Davids, David Eliason and David Christopherson, and both Davids coming from the only Church of the Nazarene and the whole Scandinavian area. And our daughters met their husbands in different times in different countries. That's how God put pieces together and say, well, you parents, now you should be not concerned anymore because I have given them a safe life, safe life with opportunities to serve. And so that's why we waited until the girls got married and moved away. And then when we came to the United States, just literally to visit Olga because she was here on her 5th optional practical training here after graduating from college, when we came, we had a return flight to Volgograd. But Ivan literally begged me, and he said, if you don't try to apply for asylum now, I don't know what is going to happen to me, because he was running out of patience because of the way, he was treated a lot of times. And that was a very difficult decision because you're stepping into uncertainty. You don't know what to expect in the wonderful country of the United States when you leave everything behind. That was quite a journey, 2 years here before we had our final hearing in Washington. And just only again because of God's mercy and grace, we got a status of asylees, and immediately started serving in this church in the capacity of, I'm still a South Charleston First Church of the Nazarene, and my president, and Ivan just has been doing so many other things in the church, and he's still working at the church. So that's how those 17 years paved the way, and God heard the plea, and he knew we wanted our children, our girls, to be finally safe and being able not to be ashamed of their nationality.
I know that part of the story of actually coming to faith in the first place was because of people caring for you and showing that care. Could you talk a little bit about how that occurred? And then I suppose I want to ask both of you actually how that impacts your life now, as I know that you deliberately desire to hopefully care for other people.
Right. Well, when in the beginning, when all the missionaries were showing all kinds of signs of care through multiple work and witness trips, that is well depicted in the movie, how they served us. We've never had that from anyone else. So that was the reason, the main factor. We started thinking more of why they're doing this. And Ivan popped so many questions. And he was actually arguing with Lonnie Norris and the pastor, trying to prove that the Bible is fictional, there is nothing real in the book. And he was saved because of the pastor from Fort Wayne, Indiana, preaching about a prodigal son. That was his night when we celebrated, as a family. I was saved a little earlier, and the girls were the first ones that me, then Ivan, and was all of that. We saw the care coming from them. You immediately want to give back. You immediately want to help those who are coming. And how we started it all was that we consider it to be a privilege to host every work and witness team in our first shed, then in a bigger house again because of the missionaries. They saw the needs, they all pitched in, and every team would come to our house and we would share a meal. And that's how I knew. It was the only way how I knew to serve those people who helped you. So they've done a lot for us, including helping us to build a house, funding the van, 15-passenger van, the Weber family that Ivan was, using as our main income, and in so many other, in Olga's miraculous 4 years of college when we didn't pay $1 just because we didn't have that money. It was all a miracle, merciful love of God shown through so many different people. And while here, we just wanted to give as much as we could. I don't even know how many. I would say in the beginning I was kind of keeping account of people who we hosted here. I guess after 200 people I stopped counting because I thought that's not necessary because we're open all the time. And then while already here, Ivan was a part of a work and witness team as well at the campgrounds because he would go and just paint and take the trash and build whatever he could, all of his skills here. And when God has given me the opportunity to work at the University of Charleston as an ESL teacher first and then as the director of international students, we've gained a world. it's the world right now here, and they're all our children. And if I start making a list of the things that we've together done for them, that would be a very long one. And we do it from, wholeheartedly. First from a gratitude because we've been treated, but we want to give abundantly because the Lord is so abundant, and the Lord has poured all of his blessings upon our family, that we want to continue until our last breath. As long as our mind works, we want to be used and continue serving in everything. That even this rental place, this is the house that the church has given to us without, they're not charging us for living here. We're using it as if it's our own house to host people that need a temporary shelter, besides having multiple dinners and lunches and breakfasts in our house as well.
Ivan, as you look back at your journey of life, of all of the different decisions you've had to make, of the courageous moments, the moments to give up, how do you reflect back and look at the purpose of what you think your life is about?
Когда ты смотришь на цель, да, проходя через все это, как цель того, о чем твоя жизнь вообще, что ты думаешь является главной целью твоей жизни?
Сейчас или вообще?
You talking about the purpose right now, or?
Well, overall, as he looks back and says, what does God have as I look at my whole life?
Просто когда ты смотришь на всю свою жизнь, цель, к чему привелось это все.
Просто я очень жалею, что у меня были возможности. Вот я альпинизмом занимался, я людей таскал в горы, я не был христианином, я не мог, потому что отношение участника, это инструктора совсем другое. Я бы не мог им показать любовь Христа.
Of course, the purpose is right now we know God, to serve God, but he feels sorry that at that time he didn't know God early enough to show Christ's love when he was taking people to the mountains, when he was in his workplace, when he just feels sad that it didn't happen earlier, so he could show, how wonderful Christ is and how life can be with Jesus.
Бабушка, меня держала бабушка, воспитывала. Когда я был в 8 классе, она умерла, и с 8 класса я жил один. Я до сих пор не понимаю, как
he
как
says
это получилось.
that I've been raised by my grandmother, and when she died, she was in the 8th grade, and he lived alone, and he still doesn't understand how a 14-year-old boy could have a life just on his own without anybody, and how he never got into trouble, but that now he understands now why.
Когда я там на работе была одна женщина, она как-то через какое-то время, через 3-4 года я их встретила, она подошла, как твои дела? Я говорю, нормально, мы за тебя молимся.
And only now he recalls that there was a woman that he met who lived, who the woman who was around him where he worked. 3 or 4 years after his grandmother died, he asked a question about how he was doing, because she said, we've been praying for you. And that was so unusual for him to hear. And now Soviet Union, and in the Soviet Union, when God was not even, it was prohibited even to pronounce the word of God. But now he says it all so clear, goes back to understand the reason that God literally saved me from all the hardships, not the life hardships, it was very difficult to live, but all the evil things that could have happened to me, even all the impact that others, teenagers or the youth, could impact him in a bad way. He understands that God actually pulled him through all of that and brought him to a saving knowledge of Christ.
It's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with the film Between Borders, and then also having the time with us today. It is wonderful to hear your heart for so many others, and even in your house, constantly the work that you are doing. Thank you for, I think, providing such inspiration for so many, whatever they may be going through. To keep persisting, but also, as Ivan shared at the end, come to Jesus as fast as you can, because that is always the best way.
Yes.
Ivan and Violetta, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us on Towards Understanding.
Thank you very much, and have a blessed night or morning.
Не на это
Thank
я
you so much,
уверен.
Violetta and
Моник.
Ivan Petrosyan, my guests on
you.
Towards Understanding.